In our quiet suburban neighborhood, the Homeowners Association, HOA, was known for its strict enforcement of aesthetic rules. From the moment I moved into my charming little house, I understood the unspoken agreement: maintain the uniformity and charm of our community, and all would be well. The houses were a patchwork of muted colors, well-manicured lawns, and neatly trimmed hedges. Each homeowner seemed to wear the same badge of compliance. We had all agreed to uphold a certain standard that defined our community's identity. I never had any qualms about following these guidelines. My own front yard was a testament to my adherence. The flower beds flaunted bursts of color during every season, carefully curated to align with the HOA's directives, yet still brimming with life and vibrancy. I had cultivated an array of perennials and annuals, each plant meticulously chosen for both beauty and sustainability. My garden attracted compliments from neighbors who admired my knack for gardening while still maintaining an aesthetic that fell within the HOA's expectations. As I tended to my flowers on warm summer evenings, I often felt like I was not just nurturing plants, but contributing to our community's spirit. I believed in the idea of home, one that resonated through shared experiences and visual harmony. But this sense of belonging would soon be tested in ways I never imagined. One ordinary day, as I pruned my roses under the soft glow of dusk, I received a letter from the HOA that sent chills down my spine. The notice claimed that my garden had become a wildlife attraction and posed a distraction to the neighborhood. The words echoed around me like an absurd accusation, as if my attempts at creating beauty were now being judged as a nuisance. My heart sank at the sight of the fines, outlined in bold letters on the page, that demanded immediate action: remove my plants or face escalating penalties. I felt blindsided by their sudden shift from oversight to hostility. How could they consider something so innocuous as my garden a threat? Wasn't a vibrant yard part of what made our neighborhood charming? It felt surreal, like watching a scene unfold in a movie where the protagonist is unjustly accused. Yet, even as frustration bubbled within me, I found clarity in another thought. This was not merely about my garden. It was about standing up against an authority that had overstepped its bounds. As someone who had always lived within the parameters established by the HOA, this felt like an unexpected crisis inviting me to rise against their rigidity. And perhaps it was time I acknowledged who I really was beyond just the compliant homeowner. Little did they know that their actions would provoke a fight they never anticipated from someone with deep connections and a fierce determination to protect what mattered most to me. My front yard garden was more than just a patch of flowers. It was a living testament to my passion for nature and creativity. Each morning, I would step outside and inhale the fragrant aroma of blooming lilacs mingling with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil. The vibrant colors were a visual symphony, with riotous reds and yellows dancing alongside soft blues and purples. Butterflies flitted from petal to petal while bees busily collected nectar, a gentle reminder of the life that thrived in this small corner of our neighborhood. What truly set my garden apart was its diversity. I had carefully selected a variety of plants that flourished together, each contributing its unique beauty to the whole tableau. Towering sunflowers stood sentinel at the back, their cheerful faces turned toward the sun, while clusters of lavender released soothing scents into the air. A delicate row of daisies swayed gently in the breeze, their simple charm framing an intimate seating area where I often sipped tea during lazy afternoons. I took great pride in creating an inviting atmosphere not only for myself but also for my neighbors. My garden had become a communal gathering place. On weekends, children would play among the blooms, their laughter echoing as they chased butterflies or picked a handful of colorful flowers to take home. Adults would stop by to chat and admire what they affectionately referred to as my little oasis amid our suburban landscape. Compliments flowed freely, and I reveled in the shared joy my garden brought to those around me. This connection to my neighbors deepened my love for gardening. It wasn't merely about aesthetics. It was about fostering relationships and cultivating community spirit. I often hosted informal gatherings, garden picnics under canopies of leafy branches, adorned with twinkling lights, or cozy evenings around a fire pit surrounded by fragrant herbs that provided both flavor and comfort to our meals. Each time we gathered, I relished in showing off my handiwork while listening to stories that tied us together. But perhaps the most precious moments came when I would find quiet time alone among my plants. Immersed in their colors and textures, I felt grounded and connected to something bigger than myself. It was here where I could reflect on life's complexities or unwind after a long day, letting nature nurture me just as much as I nurtured it. So when the HOA's notice arrived, targeting this cherished space, I felt like an intruder was breaching not just my property, but also the bonds we had formed within our community fabric. They viewed my vibrant sanctuary as an eyesore rather than recognizing it for what it truly represented: unity, joy, and resilience, a stark contrast against their rigid standards. Little did they know that they would soon face more than just a passionate gardener defending her space. They were challenging what had become a vital part of our neighborhood's identity. It was an ordinary Tuesday when everything changed. I had just finished my morning tea, the steam rising in delicate spirals, while I gazed out at my beloved garden bathed in golden sunlight. The tranquility was abruptly shattered by the sound of the doorbell ringing insistently. The delivery man stood at my doorstep, holding an envelope that bore the unmistakable logo of our homeowners association. Little did I know, this would be the beginning of a battle that would shake the foundations of my community. Heart pounding with curiosity and unease, I tore open the envelope while standing there on my front porch. My eyes scanned the words, and with each line, disbelief washed over me like a cold wave. They accused me of maintaining a wildlife attraction and labeled my garden a distraction to the neighborhood. The language felt surreal, as if I were reading lines from a script meant for a dramatized tale rather than my quotidian life in an orderly suburb. The claim felt absurd. My flourishing garden was a tapestry of color and life, carefully curated to bring beauty to our shared environment, not chaos. How could they possibly see butterflies and hummingbirds as anything but delightful? I could hardly process the words as I read about fines that would escalate if I didn't comply with their demands to remove my plants immediately. The thought of tearing out what I had nurtured with love and dedication sent waves of fury coursing through me. I sat down on the porch steps, clutching the notice tightly in my fist as if it were a lifeline. My mind raced through memories, children laughing as they played hide-and-seek among my flowers, neighbors stopping to chat and share gardening tips. Wasn't my garden a symbol of community pride? How could this organization, charged with preserving our neighborhood's beauty, view it as detrimental? Feelings that surged within me were multifaceted: anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of injustice. This wasn't just about plants or aesthetic standards. They were dismissing everything that made our interactions rich and meaningful. No longer could I remain a compliant resident who followed the rules without question. This encroachment demanded a response. In that moment of reflection, clarity began to crystallize within me. They might have overstepped their boundaries, but I wasn't powerless. My father's legacy stood behind me. His connections in the military and local government whispered possibilities into my ear. Perhaps this confrontation was not merely an ordeal, but also an opportunity to reclaim not only my garden, but also the spirit of unity within our little corner of suburbia. With renewed determination burning in my chest, I decided then and there that I wouldn't let this intrusion go unchallenged. The HOA would soon discover they had underestimated me, and I was ready to fight back in ways they never anticipated. The notice from the HOA felt more like a dagger than a mere piece of paper. As I sat on my porch, the weight of their demands settled heavily on my shoulders. They imposed a fine that seemed outrageous, as if they were punishing me not for wrongdoing, but for daring to express my love for nature in a way that didn't conform to their narrow vision. The ultimatum was clear: remove my cherished plants within 30 days or face escalating penalties that threatened to drain my savings. With every word I reread, anger bubbled up within me. How could they take such a personal and meaningful part of my life and reduce it to a financial transaction? My garden was not just an assortment of plants. It was a sanctuary filled with memories and laughter, a vibrant testament to my creativity and care. To them, it was merely a problem to be fixed, something at odds with their rigid standards. The injustice of the situation felt like a tidal wave crashing over me, pulling me under with its force. I found myself oscillating between disbelief and fury. One moment, I recalled the children laughing and chasing butterflies in the floral maze I had created. The next, I was consumed by indignation at the thought of dismantling that happiness piece by piece. Every flower held significance, a reminder of time spent nurturing not just plants but community relationships through shared experiences in my garden's embrace. As I paced back and forth on my porch, tears prickled at the corners of my eyes. This wasn't just about plants. It was about passion, identity, and belonging. I had poured countless hours into creating a space that enriched our neighborhood. Now it felt as though those who governed us were devaluing all that hard work, dismissing it as nothing more than an inconvenience. In those emotional moments, I began to reflect on how quickly authority could mutate into oppression when left unchecked. The HOA wielded its power like a weapon, believing they were safeguarding our neighborhood's image while simultaneously trampling on the very spirit that made it unique. How many other residents were suffering quietly under similar indignities? How many had surrendered their passions simply because they feared consequences? I realized then that this battle extended beyond my garden. It represented an opportunity to challenge the constraints that sought to define our lives so narrowly. Filled with renewed purpose and fiery determination, I knew I couldn't remain silent amid such palpable unfairness. My garden was worth fighting for, not merely as an arrangement of flora, but as an embodiment of community spirit and individuality. With each passing day until the deadline approached, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. The HOA would soon come to realize that their reign wouldn't go unchallenged. Not from me, not from anyone who believed in celebrating diversity over conformity. As I prepared to confront the HOA, I couldn't help but reflect on my father's legacy. A retired military general whose career had been marked by duty, honor, and an unwavering commitment to service. Growing up in his household meant learning the importance of standing up for what was right and understanding the complexities of power dynamics in society. He had navigated the corridors of government with ease, building connections that spanned across various levels, from local officials to influential figures in Washington. Dad was not just a man of authority, he was a mentor who taught me about integrity and the significance of advocacy. I watched as he took on challenging issues throughout his career, always emphasizing the need to approach authority with respect, but never allowing it to intimidate him. His stories about facing bureaucratic hurdles instilled in me a belief that anyone could affect change if they harnessed their voice and resources wisely. I recalled countless evenings spent at our dining table where discussions ranged from military strategy to community initiatives. My father often expressed frustration over systems that stifled creativity or marginalized voices, especially within neighborhoods like ours. His tales were filled with lessons about perseverance and the necessity of confronting unjust authority, lessons that resonated deeply with me as I faced my own battle against the HOA. He had cultivated relationships with local leaders, environmental advocates, and even urban planners during his tenure. These connections provided him insights into navigating complex regulations and understanding how to advocate effectively for change. It was this wealth of knowledge that I felt compelled to draw upon as I contemplated my next steps against the HOA's unwarranted demands. While my garden was personal, a reflection of my passions and efforts, it suddenly became a focal point in a larger conversation about community values and individuality. Armed with my father's teachings and connections, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The HOA might have viewed me as just another homeowner challenging their rules, but they were unprepared for the depth of resolve fueled by my background. My first step involved reaching out to contacts my father had maintained over the years, individuals who understood zoning laws, environmental regulations, and how these intersected with community governance. As I began gathering information, it became clear that there were layers of complexity surrounding not just my garden, but also the HOA's authority itself. I realized that this wasn't merely a personal fight. It was an opportunity to advocate for others who might be suffering under similar circumstances without the means or voice to challenge their own situations. My father's influence provided me with a framework for action, one that emphasized strategic thinking rather than blind confrontation. With every passing day leading up to the deadline set by the HOA, I meticulously crafted my plan. The path ahead would involve more than just defending my garden. It would require dismantling misconceptions about individual expression within our community while holding those in power accountable for their actions. As I prepared for battle, I embraced both my heritage and newfound courage. I was ready to reclaim not only my garden but also the spirit of individuality that made our neighborhood thrive. As I steeled myself for the upcoming battle against the HOA, a sense of resolve washed over me. This wasn't just about preserving my garden, it was about standing up for the values I cherished. Motivated by a fierce determination to protect my home and the spirit of community it represented, I began to strategize how to fight back effectively. My first step was to gather evidence that would support my case. Armed with my father's teachings on advocacy, I realized that a well-researched argument could dismantle the HOA's claims. The first order of business was to learn everything I could about their allegations. What defined a wildlife attraction? What constituted a distraction? I dove into local ordinances and HOA bylaws, scrutinizing every detail to understand where their authority began and ended. The more I researched, the clearer it became that their accusations were flimsy at best. My garden had been designed with biodiversity in mind, and research showed that native plants actually supported local ecosystems rather than disrupt them. With this knowledge in hand, I began documenting everything, taking photographs of my thriving plants, noting how they supported local wildlife without causing harm or disorder. I also reached out to neighbors who had expressed admiration for my garden over the years. Their testimonials would prove invaluable. After all, if my garden brought joy to others, how could it be deemed detrimental? As conversations unfolded, many shared similar frustrations with HOA regulations that felt overly restrictive and stifled individual expression within our community. Engaging with these neighbors not only bolstered my evidence, but also forged deeper connections among us. It became evident that I wasn't alone in feeling oppressed by arbitrary rules. Several residents had hesitated to speak out due to fear of fines or retaliation from the HOA board. This solidarity ignited something within me, a realization that this cause extended beyond just one person's garden. It's funny how quickly a small cause can turn into something much bigger. Sometimes the right momentum changes everything, just like hitting that subscribe button seems to bring people the luck they need when standing up to injustice. But back to the story. It was about reclaiming our right to cultivate our homes as we saw fit. Next, I turned my attention to leveraging my father's network. With his connections in local government and knowledge of zoning laws, I knew there were allies out there who could help amplify our voices. After gathering sufficient evidence against the HOA's standards and practices, I approached some of his contacts who had worked on environmental regulations and community planning. Their insights proved illuminating. They highlighted potential zoning violations committed by the HOA itself regarding its treatment of homeowners' gardens. This information felt like ammunition, evidence that not only could defend me, but also expose discrepancies in how they enforced rules selectively among residents. I meticulously organized all this information into a comprehensive report outlining not just why the HOA's claims against me were unfounded, but also highlighting broader concerns about their governance style. As days passed and the deadline loomed closer, my initial feelings of despair transformed into empowerment. I was no longer merely defending a garden. I was spearheading a movement for change within our neighborhood. With each step taken toward gathering evidence and rallying support around our shared ideals of individuality and community spirit, I felt increasingly prepared for whatever confrontation lay ahead. The battle might be daunting, but equipped with passion and purpose, and driven by a sense of justice, I was ready to challenge an authority that sought to silence us all. Armed with determination and a network of connections, I dove deeper into the investigation of the HOA's practices concerning zoning and environmental regulations. I knew that to effectively challenge their authority, I needed not just to defend my garden, but to unearth any potential misconduct on their part. The idea of leveraging my father's connections was cemented in my mind as a strategic advantage. With a single phone call, I reached out to one of my father's former colleagues who had worked closely with urban planners and local government agencies. After exchanging pleasantries, I explained my situation and requested insight into the HOA's zoning regulations, focusing on any discrepancies I could exploit. Her willingness to assist me astonished me. This was more than just an inquiry, it felt like an alliance being forged. I arranged to meet her at a cozy cafe that smelled of freshly brewed coffee and pastries, the warmth enveloping us as we sat down at a corner table. With her extensive experience in zoning laws, she provided me with invaluable information about what constituted acceptable landscaping practices in our community. She pulled out documents outlining the zoning regulations applicable to our neighborhood, emphasizing sections that pertain specifically to private property rights and environmental impact assessments. Most people don't realize how many rights they have, she told me earnestly. Your garden is not only beautiful but likely compliant with local sustainability efforts. It was reassuring to know that my passion for biodiversity wasn't just commendable, it was also shielded by law. With the knowledge she bestowed upon me, I discovered that the HOA had a history of overstepping boundaries, often misinterpreting zoning laws to fit their rigid standards. Armed with this evidence, I returned home buzzing with purpose, eager to review documents alongside my initial findings. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the claims against my garden relied on arbitrary interpretations rather than sound legal grounding. Encouraged by this newfound intelligence, I proceeded to look into environmental regulations that related directly to gardening practices in suburban homes. With another call, I contacted an environmental advocate my father knew well. Their expertise further equipped me with arguments about how maintaining biodiversity was essential for enhancing local ecosystems, a point that directly countered the HOA's claim that my garden was merely a nuisance. The more layers I peeled back from their public records and enforcement methods, the more anomalies began to emerge regarding how they managed enforcement among residents, often targeting those who didn't conform to their notion of proper aesthetics. It dawned on me that this wasn't just about protecting my garden. It showcased a systemic issue within our neighborhood governance. As friends joined me in gathering testimonials voicing their frustrations towards similar experiences with the HOA, it felt as if we were forming a grassroots movement challenging unjust authority together. The sense of solidarity grew stronger day by day. Each piece of information collected became another nail in the coffin of the HOA's dubious claims. When I decided to draft another report incorporating everything I'd learned, from zoning irregularities to environmental advocacy, it no longer felt like just a defense for my garden, but rather an assertion for community rights and individual freedoms against oppressive forces. Feeling empowered and competent through this process gave me renewed confidence. We were ready not only to confront the HOA, but to reshape its role within our community entirely. The stage was set for an upcoming confrontation, one that would force them to reckon with their own shortcomings while ensuring that individual expression would not just survive but thrive among us all. With a wealth of information gathered and a renewed sense of purpose, I set out to build a comprehensive case against the HOA. This required meticulous organization and a strategic approach that would leverage every piece of evidence I had accumulated in my fight for not just my garden, but for community rights. My first task was to compile the documentation. I created a file that included photographs of my garden in all its seasonal glory, highlighting its diversity and beauty. Each image told a story of care and commitment, illustrating that my garden had become integral to the community rather than the distraction the HOA claimed. Alongside these visuals, I organized the relevant zoning regulations and environmental laws that supported my position, ensuring they were easily accessible for reference. Next, I reached out to neighbors who had expressed their admiration for my garden, inviting them to share their thoughts in written testimonials. As I spoke with each of them, it became evident that many people felt similarly oppressed by the HOA's overly stringent enforcement of rules. Their stories mirrored mine, gardens adversely judged not for their beauty or ecological benefits, but rather for not adhering to arbitrary standards that stifled individuality. During gatherings at local parks and informal meetups in our community, it was encouraging to witness the solidarity taking shape. Residents began discussing how they too felt discouraged from expressing their creative visions due to fear of HOA retaliation. With each person who spoke up, I sensed a growing tide of support. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about reclaiming our right to express ourselves in our homes without unnecessary constraints. As I assembled everyone's testimonials into a cohesive narrative, it became clear that we shared common grievances against the HOA's practices: vague enforcement rules, selective treatment of residents, and an apparent disregard for community input in decision-making processes. Each testimonial bolstered our collective stance against what seemed like systemic oppression. To solidify our allegations further, I decided to conduct additional research into past complaints filed with the HOA. If there were patterns in the handling of grievances regarding exterior modifications or landscaping choices, it could underline the inconsistency with which they operated. It took several calls and persuasive conversations with former residents who had faced similar issues before, but slowly, I pieced together information about prior disputes, and how they were often resolved favorably only for those who fell in line with the HOA's vision. Finally, with evidence compiled from various sources, my photographs showcasing how my garden aligned with community aesthetics, testimonies from supportive neighbors, documented zoning regulations alongside previous complaints, I began drafting a formal report. This document would serve as both defense and declaration, a categorically articulated case advocating not just for my garden's preservation, but also as an assertion for individual rights within our enclave. Equipped with this thorough preparation, I felt ready for legal conversations and discussions with the HOA board members looming on the horizon. The stakes were no longer just personal. They were emblematic of a much larger movement toward accountability in our neighborhood governance. As days turned into action and strategy energized by enthusiasm among allies crystallized into tangible goals, I could almost feel the momentum shift. It was exhilarating. This wasn't merely about saving my garden, it represented hope, a refusal to let stifling authority dictate how we lived our lives. The stage was now set for confrontation. We were prepared not just to win this battle, but to foster change that could redefine our community for years to come. As the day of the court proceedings arrived, a palpable tension filled the air. A mix of anticipation and uncertainty hung over the packed courtroom. I had prepared meticulously for this moment, armed with evidence, supportive testimonials, and the moral fortitude cultivated from my community's backing. But as I walked into that space, I felt the weight of the situation press heavily on my shoulders. It was more than just my garden at stake. It represented values we all held dear, the right to express ourselves and support one another in our pursuit of beauty. The courtroom buzz settled as the judge took his seat, casting an authoritative gaze over the room. I sat next to my attorney, my hands trembling slightly as I clasped them together to steady my nerves. Across the aisle, the HOA's representatives looked imposing in their austere suits, exuding an air of arrogance that sparked my determination even further. They believed they were an entrenched authority, but today they would confront a united front. As the proceedings commenced, our attorney stood to present our case. Each argument made in my defense outlined not only why my garden was beneficial to the community, but also highlighted the HOA's past infractions against residents' rights. My passion intensified with every word spoken. I focused on articulating how gardens like mine supported local ecosystems rather than disrupted them. I shared personal anecdotes about how children played among the flowers and neighbors often gathered to enjoy the vibrant scenery. With each point made, I could see some members of the audience nodding in agreement. Then came a pivotal moment when one of the HOA representatives rose to make their case against me, presenting their view that my garden was indeed a distraction from neighborhood aesthetics. However, they struggled to define clearly what constituted a distraction while trying to uphold their premise. It became evident that their arguments rested on thin grounds, arbitrary standards that lacked any substantial framework. In a surprising twist, midway through their testimony, I noticed a familiar face in the audience, a former resident who had endured similar challenges under the HOA's watchful eye. She stood up suddenly and requested permission to speak on her experiences with the HOA's selective enforcement of regulations affecting her own garden in years past. The courtroom divided its attention. Her heartfelt testimonial struck a chord with everyone present. As she recounted her own battles and frustrations, it added fuel to our fire, further undermining the HOA's credibility. I felt a rush of solidarity ripple through our supporters as we rallied behind her words. This was no longer just my fight, but a collective stand against oppression, a shared narrative that many neighbors resonated with deeply. By the end of the day, I felt both drained and invigorated simultaneously. This hard-fought battle wasn't over. The judge provided an opportunity for both sides to submit additional evidence before making a ruling, offering me a glimmer of hope amid an intense struggle. As we left the courtroom together, my supporters gathered close, their faces illuminated by a sense of resolute determination. We had turned what could have been a singular conflict into a movement advocating for community rights and individuality in our neighborhoods. The promise of victory now didn't solely rest on the outcome of one court case. It encapsulated an ongoing endeavor to transform our community into one that celebrated diversity and personal expression rather than suppressing it. Though challenges lay ahead, one thing became clear. I was fueled by resolve now more than ever and ready to fight with everything I had. This was just the beginning. The moment of truth arrived as we gathered in the courtroom for the judge's ruling. The air was thick with anticipation, my heart pounding in my chest as I exchanged glances with my supporters. Each face reflected the same mixture of hope and anxiety that coursed through me. It was incredible to think how far we had come from that initial notice from the HOA. What started as a personal battle had evolved into a significant stand for community rights. As the judge entered, silence enveloped the room. He took his seat and glanced over the notes before him, then looked up to address us all. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, including testimonies from both sides, I have reached a decision. My breath caught in my throat as I held onto the edge of the table, desperate for his words to be favorable. The ruling came like a refreshing wave. The court finds in favor of the defendant. My heart soared as I processed what that meant. My garden would remain intact. The implications were immense. Not only did this decision validate my right to express myself through my gardening, but it also sent a clear message to the HOA that their authority could be challenged. As I turned to see the reactions from those standing with me, I noticed some members of the HOA look visibly shaken. Their expressions shifted from arrogance to disbelief, their confidence evaporating under the weight of accountability. They had relied on their perceived dominance over homeowners, but today revealed their fallibility. My mind raced with thoughts of how this ruling might alter future interactions between residents and the HOA. While I felt elated by our victory, I also understood that this outcome could shake up power dynamics within our community. The judge's ruling had implications beyond just one garden. It signaled that residents could no longer be silenced or intimidated by arbitrary rules enforced without justification. In the aftermath of the verdict, conversations began to swirl among neighbors about how we might collectively ensure that our voices were heard moving forward. This ruling sparked a newfound determination among residents to challenge other restrictive policies upheld by the HOA that stifled creativity and individuality. As we exited the courthouse, I was met with hugs and congratulations from my supporters, a tangible reminder that we were not alone in this fight. Many expressed gratitude for what they saw as a catalyst for change, igniting discussions about reevaluating other outdated regulations imposed by the association. Yet amid our celebration, it became clear that while I had won this battle, there was still much work to do. The HOA would not simply accept defeat. They would likely regroup and attempt to maintain control over their narrative. The next steps would involve ensuring transparency in their operations and advocating for fair treatment among all homeowners. In that moment of victory, I felt more empowered than ever, not just for myself, but for all who felt marginalized by rigid systems of governance. We had taken an important step toward reclaiming our rights and reshaping our neighborhood into one where creativity and individuality could flourish without fear of reprisal. As we walked away from the courthouse arm in arm, ready to celebrate our hard-earned victory together, I knew this was only the beginning of a broader movement toward accountability and empowerment within our community, one where every voice mattered and collective action became our greatest strength against oppressive authority. Reflecting on my journey through this challenging ordeal, I realized how much I had grown as an individual. What began as a personal battle over my garden transformed into a pivotal moment of self-discovery, empowerment, and resilience. Initially, I felt blindsided by the HOA's sudden aggression, questioning my capability to stand up against an established authority that had governed our community for so long. However, as I faced each hurdle, I unearthed a strength within myself that I hadn't fully recognized before. Navigating the complexities of the legal landscape taught me invaluable lessons about advocacy and the importance of voice. With each interaction, whether with neighbors providing testimonials or officials from local government who shared insights, I learned that true power doesn't merely come from connections or titles, but from understanding one's rights and embodying a steadfast commitment to what one believes in. The experience instilled in me a renewed sense of purpose. My garden was not just greenery, but also a symbol of creativity, individual expression, and community spirit. Throughout this process, something remarkable happened. I galvanized my neighbors and united them under a common cause. As we shared our stories and grievances against the HOA, I witnessed how grassroots movements could evolve from single experiences into collective action. Together, we forged bonds stronger than the rigid rules imposed upon us by our governing body. This unity gave credence to our fight, not just for my beloved garden, but for every homeowner who felt marginalized or silenced by arbitrary regulations. Moreover, confronting authority underscored the importance of strategic thinking and adaptability. As I prepared for court proceedings armed with evidence and emotional testimonials, I learned to transform vulnerability into power. My once timid adherence to HOA guidelines was replaced by assertiveness. I now asserted my right to cultivate my unique vision of beauty without fear of undue reprimand. In essence, this experience reshaped my understanding of authority itself, an entity that can be interrogated and challenged when it strays from its intended purpose. Each step forward brought moments of doubt, but also profound clarity about who I wanted to be, a fierce advocate for not just myself, but for others who may have their voices overshadowed. The courtroom ruling represented more than just a legal victory. It epitomized progress toward nurturing an environment where individuals felt empowered to express themselves without retaliation. Now, as I stand amidst the flowers in my garden, each bloom a testament to perseverance, I feel imbued with new confidence. No longer will I shy away from standing up for what's right. No longer will I allow arbitrary standards dictated by others to dictate the vibrancy of our community. This journey has taught me that standing firm in one's beliefs can create ripples that transform neighborhoods. While there remains work to be done regarding transparency in governance and addressing inequities imposed by associations like the HOA, I am ready for the challenges ahead. This experience has ignited within me a passionate resolve to actively participate in shaping our community's future, one where creativity is celebrated and every voice is valued. Empowered by adversity, I am prepared not only to defend my garden, but also to advocate for a thriving space where all residents can cultivate their own dreams freely and joyfully. As I reflect on the journey that unfolded from the conflict with my HOA, it's clear that this experience has fundamentally reshaped not only my perspective, but also the dynamics within our community. This battle was not merely about defending my garden, it became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of collective action in the face of authority that seeks to impose arbitrary rules. Through adversity, I discovered an inner strength that I hadn't recognized before. Initially, I felt intimidated by the HOA's perceived power and the rigid standards they enforced. However, as I navigated through the complexities of legal and community engagement, I learned to embrace my voice and stand firm in what I believed was right. This journey taught me that rules should not come at the expense of personal expression and the vibrancy of communal life. The support from my neighbors was pivotal. We became a coalition united by a shared purpose. I realized that many felt similarly oppressed by the HOA's strictures, often hesitant to voice their frustrations. Our gathering momentum transformed my individual struggle into a broader movement, advocating for the right to express ourselves freely within our own homes and gardens. The experiences we shared and the bonds we forged laid a foundation for solidarity that would outlast any legal ruling. Moreover, this confrontation with authority highlighted the importance of challenging norms that stifle individuality. The victory in court was a powerful reminder that communities thrive when diverse voices are acknowledged and celebrated rather than suppressed. It sparked conversations about reevaluating other restrictive policies upheld by the HOA, indicating that change could be both possible and necessary. In witnessing how quickly collective action could emerge from personal experiences, I understood that our neighborhood had entered a new era, one where accountability would take precedence over complacency. Empowered by our shared struggle, we began to discuss ways to ensure ongoing transparency from the HOA. It was exhilarating to explore possibilities for fostering an environment where creativity and personal expression flourished unencumbered by fear of reprisal. This journey has also taught me valuable lessons about resilience, advocacy, and leadership. While I initially approached this struggle with trepidation, I emerged as a fierce proponent of community rights, willing to defend not just my garden, but also the thriving tapestry of unique expressions within our neighborhood. It underscored for me that standing up against oppressive forces can create ripples of change. Each small victory contributes to a larger narrative of empowerment. As I stand amidst the blossoms in my garden now, a sanctuary that represents both beauty and defiance, I am filled with gratitude for the lessons learned and the relationships strengthened along the way. This experience has ignited within me a commitment to continue advocating for justice and fairness within our community. In conclusion, I have come to understand that while rules are sometimes necessary for order, they must not overshadow personal expression or community spirit. As we move forward, let us remember that every voice matters and that true progress arises when individuals unite for a common cause. My garden will forever remain a symbol of what can be achieved when resilience meets collective action, an enduring reminder that community dynamics can shift toward inclusivity and celebration of individuality when we choose to challenge authority together.